Broadcasting live from the offices of policebackground.net. This is the Police Applicant Podcast with your host, Ken Roybal.
Hey, everybody. This is a special event, YouTube Live, the Police Applicant Podcast. And we are simulcasting on YouTube and the Police Applicant Group North America on Facebook. I want to welcome JJ Williams and Moses Castillo. Hey guys, how you doing this evening?
Doing great.
Hey Ken, how you doing, brother? Good to see you.
I'm good. How you doing, brother?
Good.
All right. Well, what I want to do, we're gonna, I've been contacted by a bunch of people about this episode, and I think we got the three most perfect people for this event, because what we want to do is we want to blow the lid off of LAPD hiring, lowering their standards and stuff like that. Because there was a Fox News story with we all know Gina, and she did an amazing job on this Fox story. We're gonna play that video, but apparently, as a result of that video, LAPD Chief Moore and retired captain, now personnel department AGM, they're not very happy with us about telling the behind the scenes stuff about LAPD hiring and lowering the standards. So what we're going to do, I want to go around and talk for a moment and introduce you guys. And so if you can, JJ, starting with JJ, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you guys got to be experts in the LAPD hiring process.
Well, I started with LAPD background unit in April of 2002, and worked my way up as an investigator to team lead, which is a team quasi supervisor, to a group supervisor, and developed the tier system while I was there, which was very effective in hiring all the top tier candidates. And I spent the last 5 years just managing all the police background cases that hit the floor. They crossed the desk and went out to the investigators, and basically I had to say so if they were good enough to go to them or not. And the vast majority of them came across my desk when they were completed as well, before they went to the review section.
Yeah, so you were there
hired in April of 2022.
Yeah, you were there for 20 years.
20 years and 1 day.
JJ and when I started, JJ was still a background investigator 1, and when I left, he was my supervisor.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. So you were there post LAPD having backgrounds.
Well, yes. In fact, I was hired by LAPD, and they ran the unit. So they were in charge with it. We're part of the Red Division. We had a captain there, great captain, lieutenant. The whole supervisory staff was all LAPD. There was no civilian supervisory positions. We were just civilian investigators. Yeah.
So you were part of the civilian when personnel took over. You were part of the civilian cadre of background investigators, and I met Moses back in the day when backgrounds was run by LAPD and it was administrative investigation section. So tell us a little bit about you, Moses, and your career with LAPD.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I was with LAPD for over 30 years, 28 and a half as a sworn and 2 as a reserve. And what's relevant for this podcast is that I was with LAPD backgrounds from middle of 1995 to the beginning of 1998. And not to my own horn, but I took my job as a background investigator of these police applicants very serious, to heart. We want to make sure that we hired the best of the best. And if you didn't meet our standards, you just don't deserve to be a cop. And I could tell you some of my cases that I submitted for not meeting our standards, in other words, a DQ, disqualifier, sometimes it was overlooked because of the person's either race or being if it was a female. This has been going on for decades.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes overlooking some of those standards just to be able to hire or be able to say we hired a particular group, either whether it's females, whether it was Latinos. Because remember back in the day, they used to have these certification meetings, right, where all these police applicants would show up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we would line them up by their race and their gender, and it just looked all the females in one line and all the Latinos over here, and Hispanics in one line, Hispanics, male, Caucasians, and then African Americans in one line. It just, to me, it just was awful to view, and just to give you your viewers heads kind of like a police backgrounds was viewed as like the internal affairs for police applicants. Because
that's a good way of putting it.
For the very beginning, we tell police applicants, you're going to be going through the background process from the moment that you applied and your last day on probation on patrol.
Right.
Because your background is continuing. And that was the message and that's why, when we came in at the academy and all the recruits were like, oh crap. If they heard the term "had in books," that means, hey, something popped up in your background, and we're not going to see you again because you were dishonest or you lied. And we'll talk about some of our stories. But yeah, this has been going on for a long time. Is my point. Yeah,
since the 1990s, and I was with LAPD from 1980 to 2003, and I was in backgrounds as a sworn member from 97 to 2001. I got kicked out of backgrounds because they were civilianizing it. And that's why I left backgrounds. So I retired in 2003 after 4 years. I'd been in LAPD backgrounds, and then I went back in 2006 to 2018. And so I bridged the gap between me and Moses and JJ from old school LAPD when it was run by LAPD, and I was there for 12 years when it was under personnel. So I ran under both, and I know exactly how it is. And Moses is absolutely correct. This has been going on for decades. And I did the math, you guys. And between the three of us, we have almost 40 years of LAPD background experience. So I think that if the LAPD gets pissed off at us because we're telling the truth, that's the way it goes, because tonight we're going to tell the truth. So what I want to start out with, let me see here. I'm going to put some comments up here. Mr. Prime says there are plenty of qualified top-tier candidates in minority communities. They don't need to lower their standards. They need to do a better job of reaching those candidates. Correct. And, that's one thing that we'll talk about as well. If you're a minority, a diversity hire, and you go on the field and people are thinking, oh, did you get hired because, you passed everything and you really worked hard to get on the job, or because you're a diversity hire?
Right.
And those are some of the things we're going to talk about.
In all fairness, I just want to say that we are a public safety crisis nationwide. Departments across the nation are having trouble recruiting police officers. They're having trouble recruiting. On a side note, I live in Orange County, and I know someone that works in the Huntington Beach Union School District, and they have the adult school there. Well, an LAPD recruiter in recent months has already gone there at least 4 times asking for permission to promote the recruiting, the services there. And so far, the answer has been no. But to me, it shows you how desperate they are, that they're trying to do anything and everything to recruit, and it's just not happening.
Yeah,
there's no doubt. I mean, the recruitment problem's been going on, definitely got harder after 2020 and 2019, all the riots and all the defunding, situations going on. Even before that, it was getting hard in a lot of cities. Um, and it's so ironic that the cities today, that, like you were talking about, it, LA being one of them, that really promoted that defunding are the ones that are putting out the most money trying to recruit. You have Seattle, that's, Ken, you live in Washington. For years, they've been trying to buy recruits for down payments of houses or what have you, cash. Look at Minneapolis, where it all started. I mean,
Yeah.
$60,000 signing bonuses. Come on. Willing to pay your mortgage for a year. I get calls, still to this day for different sections of the country. And it's ironic. And here in Texas, same thing. I mean, they're paying cash bonuses for laterals and experienced officers. And it's hard to get them. It's hard. People don't want to do it. I mean, back in our day, we wanted to, that was something we strove for. And it was a very respected, highly regarded position. And they try to really muddy it up, make it a joke type position, make it where it doesn't really count or we don't matter. And, Moses, you are correct. A lot of people don't want to do this job this day and age. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to do it this day and age.
Yeah. So my hats off to anybody out there that still wants to become a cop, because God knows we need some great people. And if you still have it in your heart and you want to do this, by all means, give it your best shot. But I got to tell you, I hope that people learn from this podcast that we can't lower our standards, because in doing so, we're going to get those bad apples that we all don't want. And we always complain about bad cops, right? But not all cops are bastards. Not all cops are bad. And no good cop likes a bad cop. It just
absolutely not. I mean, right. And it goes back. Gina and I had a long discussion about it. Your union, LAPD, and we had a long discussion about it. But there's three main principles when a department goes to the corruption. And lowering the standards is one of the main three. Low pay is the other one, and unfair discipline across the board is the other. When you have those three combinations, you will have a corrupt police department that's in the making or in existence. So what do you have with LAPD right now? You have all three. So I'm not saying that they're totally corrupt, but they can easily head in that direction if they keep playing around with the standards. And I just looked it up, Ken, too, after we spoke yesterday briefly. When I was there in my 20-year career, they changed the standards, officially changed them twice, where they got the full approval. They tried to do two other changes that they never got the approval for. One, review had their own that they got in trouble of imposing because it was very subjective to their viewpoints. And the other was the most recent that they tried to pass right when I was retiring.
Well, in order to piggyback that, I just got word that they didn't change the standards again this last week and got the ink signature on the changes that didn't occur.
Yeah,
that have not. They just didn't change the standards again.
It's ironic that more would go on there and say we've never changed the standards when in fact they have been changed twice.
Yep.
When I came under, I remember when I first started, I was handed this big, thick book, which was the standards and guidelines. And that was our Bible. They said, you have 2 weeks to learn this and you will be grilled and tested on it. And so you went home and studied it. You took it, like you said, Moses, you took it seriously and you had to know it. And you were proud to know the standards and guidelines. So if you were out there, like we all were, we were always recruiting for the department, out there talking to people, you already could tell them if they can make it or not. So don't wait. If they say, oh, I was arrested last week for this, don't bother coming in. Wait 3 years, then maybe you can have a chance. So we were always recruiting out there in the field when we were investigating. But, I can't even believe McCraney would even say the standards hasn't been changed when he was there during one of the main changes. He was in the meetings because he was part of the hiring unit back then.
Yeah, I wanna put. Oh, go ahead, Moses. You have something?
So that reminds me, back in when I was in backgrounds, we did everything in person when it came to investigating
Everything.
the individual,
Yes.
everything in person if it was within the state of California. So
Yeah.
because we have peace officer status up and down the state of California. So I remember going as far as Eureka and the Oregon border, California, talking to people. And you're right, during that time, they would be surprised. What, LAPD's here talking about my neighbor or my friend or what? And so they would be. So yeah, you also use that to recruit. But do they still do that? Do they still investigate?
No.
In person?
They discourage field work. It's very minimal now, and most of the actual current investigators pass it off, and they have P2s doing it, police officer 2 standard, that are out there doing the checks. But these are guys that don't have the experience that these retirees have. I always did my own check. I very rarely passed off a check. It just, I was comfortable interviewing people myself. And I always did it in person, employment checks. Even Ken, you were there when they were discouraging field work. I'd still went in the field. I had to do it. It was the old fashioned way of doing it, but I truly believed in it. You don't know who you're talking to on the phone. It could be anybody.
And that's a form of lowering the standards, because
there you go.
You're not doing a thorough background check, because you learn a lot. I would go as far as asking the applicants, show me your bedroom.
Remember, that was a requirement. That was a requirement back then.
And some of the stuff that you learn, I'm not going to say to keep the privacy stuff, but dude, it's amazing.
Oh yeah.
All right, let me put it.
Remember, you used to take pictures of their bedroom and stuff. And one of the investigators came to me and he says, "Well, what do you think about this sticker in the back window of this candidate's car?" And I said, and back then it was related. It became a big movement later with the millennials, but back then it was directly related to the Aryans and the skinheads. And I was
let me put a pin in that right now, because I want to get to something. I want to make a technical note first.
Okay.
I'm out in the rural area. I live in God's country, and I'm out in the rural area, and I just got Starlink. So sometimes the satellites hand off to each other, and my face I might look like I'm going through a blender. Don't worry about it, because the way this system works is that Moses and JJ will still continue to be live, and I'll just unscramble and I'll come back. So don't worry about it. The other thing is, I want to play the video that JJ did a couple weeks ago that got LAPD's hair on fire. This is a 6-minute video. It's the full interview with Gina Silvas, right? Silva. And so it's 6 minutes, but it's a great video, and I want to share it with you guys. So let's get that going here.
A lot of the people that are being hired right now should not be police officers.
LAPD officers and LA City personnel.
It's a danger. It's a direct danger to the public.
People directly involved in the LAPD recruiting and hiring process are going public for the first time with their concerns.
We're just letting the floodgates open to people that shouldn't be on the job.
Most of our sources asked us to protect their identities for fear of retaliation, but not James Williams. He supervised LAPD police backgrounds for 20 years. Williams retired a year ago.
I have nothing to gain from this, but it's the right thing to do.
Prosecute the police!
After the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2020, followed by massive protests across the country and anti-police sentiment, Williams alleges the LAPD began making changes in its recruiting process.
We were given direction to focus more on diversity candidates, which we always have. Regardless of the candidate, the good ones always float to the top.
But he says if the top-tier candidates were not from a specific minority group,
they didn't want them, so they sat on the shelf.
I myself am a minority, and I completely believe in diversity in the department, because that's what makes Los Angeles a great city. But we need to hire good, qualified candidates that can do the job.
They started manipulating the standards and the guidelines, which that was a major issue with me.
The hiring standards are created by POST, the Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training. Candidates have to go through the peace officer selection process that includes a written exam, physical ability test, and background investigation. All law enforcement agencies in California must abide by those guidelines if they want certification for their academies and officers.
They wanted to go below those. Can't do that. It's illegal. We're governed by post standards. We're governed by government codes as well.
Williams claims it didn't matter to the department. He and other sources say the LAPD is making it too easy to be an officer because of a staffing crisis.
They're not waiting for the best possible candidate to come by. Almost feels like they don't have that time to do it. They want to meet the numbers now.
So what were the standards before compared to now?
So the physical fitness qualifier, you're supposed to have at least a 50% to get into the academy. We're now hiring people with 40, 30, and in some cases lower than 10% physical scores.
What they're doing is not helping. They're creating doubt in the public's mind.
Chief Michael Moore says the LAPD is not lowering the standards, but the hiring practices have evolved through the years.
When you're eliminating people to be a member of this organization because you can't run a mile and a half in 12 minutes, you got to ask yourself, when's the last time an officer ran a mile and a half? And understand, is that still relevant?
Our sources say the written exam is a lot easier because now it's a multiple choice test.
The written exam, we've had that test for years. And since I've gotten there, they've eased up on the standards of that written exam.
We moved to a multiple question test in place of a narrative because we saw that the narratives were judged subjectively. They were not consistent as far as people who passed or who didn't pass.
In the past, a background investigation revealing a candidate's bad credit or financial problems could have resulted in rejection. Not anymore. Williams, who used to be a cop for a different agency before becoming a background investigator and supervisor, says it's dangerous to hire people with money problems.
People that are in deep financial problems often are tempted by money. The temptations out there on patrol are vast. You may pull over a drug dealer with hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you hire somebody without integrity, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to steal.
I do worry about officers who would fall prey to bribery. The reality is that, unfortunately, this profession and this own department in the past decades have had those individuals with what I guess those same critics would say a more stringent standard. Well, if it was such a stringent standard and it was so great, how did those failures occur?
Chief Moore strongly denies the allegations that recruiters are told to focus on specific minority candidates, even if they're not qualified.
We do not hire a person on the basis of their race or their gender, but at the same time, we are pursuing qualified applicants that are representative of the diversity of this city. That is fair. That is what I think the public wants and expects.
While both sides have shared opposite views on the department's hiring practices.
It's going to be devastating if you lower the standards any more than it is right now. And who's going to suffer from that? I think primarily the community.
Chief Moore assures the public the LAPD is not hiring unqualified candidates.
I believe the recruits that we see today are better educated, they're better qualified than the prior generations.
Right.
And that at times is hard for prior generations to appreciate or to acknowledge.
Gina Silva, Fox 11 News.
Does that include you too, Chief?
Yeah, really. Oh, man, I was taking some notes on this. You know, and it's funny because, and Ken and I, we spoke of this, and Gina and I spoke of it as well, is either he's that ignorant or he's just not being told and doesn't know. I don't know which. I don't know him all that well. I only dealt with him one time when he tried to get rid of the polygraph. So for him to sit there and say we haven't changed the standards on there. Well, why did you want to get rid of the polygraph? That polygraph, and this is where him and I went head to head, accounts for 13 to 14 child molesters, sex offenders getting caught per month on the polygraph. Just that alone. Do you want that on the streets? That's the average. Now, I'm sure it's far less now because there's less applicants coming through. But at that time, when we were having this discussion back in 2017, maybe even before that. So the police commission didn't go along with that. So what was his grand plan? Well, they can fail. We'll hire them. So you have hundreds of police officers that failed the polygraph that are patrolling out there. Now, doesn't mean that they're bad people. Some people have a hard time with the polygraph. Very religious people, for instance, have a hard time with the polygraph. Very honest people, believe it or not, can struggle with the polygraph. Right. But there's a vast majority of those people that failed, that had issues, that weren't allowed to be endeavored into, was discouraged to be endeavored into, that are on the job. That's what I'm talking about, the manipulation of the testing process. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that whole written, and Ken and I, we spoke of this. They used to have an honest. When you guys came on, you had to take a standard written test. Part of it was writing, comprehension, reading, tested your cognitive skills. That's what's missing. The essay didn't allow to do it because grammar, punctuation had no bearing on it. It didn't even have to make sense. And the multiple choice has no bearing on it. The psychological department, which I always agreed with them on, was always against that. They wanted to go back to a full-blown written exam because they were struggling with people that did not know how to write, did not know how to read to take their own test in the psych department. Yeah. Those were the candidates that LA brought in. These are the same people. We have thousands of people that are on that job since my time there that have failed other written tests, the post-written test from all these other agencies. LAPD hired them. I would love to see an audit on that.
Yeah,
and
that is one
manipulation of the testing that I'm talking about.
That is. Go ahead, Moses.
I was going to say, talking about audits, the audit that I would love to see is, let's look at the background package of Rafael Perez.
He was DQ.
Yeah. And I guarantee you're going to see we recommend for DQ for these reasons.
Rafael Perez was a DQ. Mac was a DQ. Christopher Dorner was a DQ. They were all overturned by the review section in the city and were hired. Backgrounds doesn't have the final say. We could only, like you just said, we can recommend for a decision. We don't DQ anybody. The candidate DQs themselves, first of all. But we could only recommend that they don't meet the standards and guidelines. It's up to a civilian board who has zero law enforcement, because they're not supposed to have it, that reviews it, and that can overturn our decision. And that's what happened with those three candidates.
And I know that we're not going to discuss the actual disqualifiers because we're sworn to secrecy and that's confidential. but I'll tell you this, that I know the ones that I recommended for DQ, there was a handful of them that they hired anyways, and lo and behold, they were problem officers from the word go, from the moment they came on, and now the city paid lawsuit. But I know that happened back then from 95 and 98. I witnessed some of that, and I was known as the top investigator. I would get all the top projects from our lieutenant, which was Gascon, by the way. It's crazy.
No way. Are you serious? He was no way. Yeah. I had no idea he was part of that unit.
I'll tell you a quick story. I had a guy. Long story short, he wrote a letter to everybody and their mother. The governor, the senator, the mayor, the police commission, that LAPD backgrounds wasn't giving him a fair shot. And then they gave me the background. Here, work on it. I put him on the polygraph with Irv Youngblood. Remember Irv Youngblood? The top. Well, he failed it. And the issue was, I found out that he was a ATM burglar. He was working for Wells Fargo and doing ATM burglaries from the inside job, right? So he copped out to me because Irv couldn't get him, but he copped out to me. I went to guys going, okay, Lieutenant, we got him. He confessed. It's going to be a good permanent DQ. He's out of right here. And I'm going to take that recording. I'm going to give it to the sheriffs so they could prosecute him. He said, no, can't do that. And he actually ordered me. I said, why not? Well, because Miranda. You didn't give him Miranda. I said, I don't have to give him Miranda.
You don't.
Well,
And I let him
hold
go,
on.
You know, and so he actually ordered me not to turn it over. And this guy got away with millions of dollars of burglary, and 3 others got convicted. He's the only one that skated. But that was my first inclination of Gascon was not good.
Well, hang on, guys. We're kind of all over the map on our discussion. I kind of, you know what's funny? I want to tell the audience that I sent these guys this dang long. Look at this, 2 pages of notes.
Yeah, but you haven't guided us with it. You're supposed to be our leader.
I'm trying to, man. So what we want to do is we want to kind of cubbyhole the conversations into sections because we're talking about different standards. I do want to mention Mark Stocks is here. Did you notice that, JJ? Mark Stocks.
I saw that. I was reading that. It's pretty cool.
Mark Stocks is a retired Glendale PD officer and background investigator with us, and he was there before 2006 when I got there, and I imagine he was there for a while before that. But great investigator. In fact, what's funny, Mark Stocks would get all the sexual deviant backgrounds. Anybody that had
somehow no, he wouldn't get them. They were just ironically he would end up with them, and nobody knew how.
Nobody knew how that happened.
Nobody knew how it happened. He's the Cialis cases went to Mark.
Good to see you, man. What I want to do is after that interview on Fox, LAPD, that's where their heads exploded because JJ just made them start scrambling. And what I noticed about the interview is that LAPD wasn't they weren't saying no, we're refuting this based on we're refuting what JJ says based on this. They didn't say that. They went on the defensive and they just kind of put up a smoke screen and say, "Nuh-uh, we're not doing that," which is untrue. But they went into the police commission meeting, and that's where Aaron McCraney, the former LAPD captain over recruitment and hiring, who's now the assistant general manager over Public Safety Bureau at Personnel, he went in, and along with Chief Moore, and they totally smoke screened the police commission. And the police commission, the majority of them, except for one, the majority of the police commission was going, "Oh, is that right, McCraney and Moore? Oh, okay. Well, then that story must have been not a good story. You guys are not lowering the standards? You're not? Okay." And they were just buying the whole thing. So I want to go through that, what they were saying in the meeting, to show that they're full of crap. LAPD is not telling the truth. They're not telling the police commission the truth. They're not telling the mayor the truth. And that's what we're here to talk about. What I want to do first is go back in time to the 1990s and prior, when Moses and I were there, and how things have changed since it was LAPD in charge of backgrounds to the turnaround in 2001, 2002, when civilian personnel took over and things started changing. They started changing it before we left Moses, but I want to talk to Moses for a minute about the standards and things like that. We had at backgrounds, there wasn't a whole person, and you can talk about whole person evaluations, JJ, but we didn't have whole person evaluations in the 1990s. We had 10 standards. You either fell in those standards or outside those standards. If you fell one iota out of one of those 10 standards, you were out. You were a DQ. So tell us about how we used to do backgrounds, Moses, back in the 90s.
Well, it all starts with the person in the process of applying. They get to a certain stage. Once they pass the written, the oral, the medical examination, then they would get to backgrounds. But if they could initially pass backgrounds, then they make it to the psych, and then after the psych, they'll get what we call certified to be considered for the next class. And then once we complete our thing of conducting the background investigation, if they didn't meet the standards, we would write a report and make our recommendations. But the ones that we're going to get passed through to move on and hopefully get hired, then that package gets to our more senior, seasoned background investigators, and they do a thorough audit, and they have their own checklist that they make sure everything was done properly. So from that perspective, I'm glad we do that because it's a good checks and balances to make sure we don't miss anything. And then it gets to a place where now the supervisors get together in this meeting, and then they start selecting the candidates based on, back then it was their score and their ethnic background. And based on that, they would, once they felt that they reached to a certain number, or maybe the person, wasn't the top tier candidate, but they had some issues, but it wasn't a disqualifier, then that person would be non-selected. But under the city charter or whatever, you could only have a certain number of non-selects for a certain group. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there you have it. So I remember being in some of those meetings and I'm going, OMG. We bypassed some good candidates to select kind of the worst from the worst. And we bypassed some really good candidates just based on the fact that the person was Caucasian. And then I just, so yeah. So in that sense, I believe the standards, when they got to that level, it was very subjective at that point.
Yeah, and to add on to that, what happened was the candidates would be given a paper PHS. They would fill it out at home. They would bring it into backgrounds. A background investigator would bring them into the interview room, and we would complete the PIQ, which was, 35, 37 pages, and we would write it. They would not write their PIQ, and we would do a full meet and greet interview for the PIQ with them
on tape.
And then we would write the PIQ, and we would DQ them out of that interview for what would be considered the PHS interview. But prior to that, Moses, do you remember we had to go upstairs to room 150 every couple weeks? They would send a background investigator up, and the job for them that morning would be to sit down with them and complete with each candidate what was called a PQE. And that was 10 questions. They were the 10 standards, and that was the very first time they had anything to do with background. So even before they completed their PHS, we would meet with them. If they answered yes on one of those 10 questions, they were a perm DQ, and they were done that morning. Only the ones that passed that went down and were able to complete a PHS. Now, when the background investigator got the package, the file, they would look and see if the candidate met those 10 standards. If they fell out of one of those standards, we would consider what would be called, I forget what they called it then, but then we would complete a face sheet and they would be disqualified. Yeah, it was a SABI. I can't remember what the acronym is for. And then we would DQ them based on one of those 10 standards. Do you remember that, Moses?
Yeah, and I remember there was there's some that were kind of temporary, holds based on, if they acknowledge that they were involved with so many traffic citations or financial hardships and bad past due accounts, collection accounts that were fairly recent, and then that would help us, deal with that right then and there and send them a letter saying, hey, catch up to us, or catch up with your credit, make it right, get back to us within 6 months, a year, whatever the case may be. So those were temporary ones. And I always told my applicants when I would meet with them, the reason we do this because the job's already stressful to begin with, and if you come on the job with finances being an issue, it's going to be added to your stress, and we just don't want that. And then we take pride with LAPD. We don't want creditors calling the station, hey, one of your officers owes us money. Back then, creditors did call your employers, and so we didn't want that. So, anyways, it was just trying to give them, hey, it's not the end of the world. You can still do it, but just work on your credit or work on driving better and obeying the law, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, Moses was nicer than me. If they didn't meet those standards, they were disqualified. And so the question I have moving forward, and I just want to bring up that Moses was correct. We would go all up and down the state of California. Every month there would be three investigators. Two would go up up Northern California, and one would go down to San Diego, and we would do everything. We would door knock everything in person. There were no telephonic backgrounds back then. And so moving forward, my point is that backgrounds were extremely difficult to pass back in the 90s. Extremely difficult to pass. And so at this police commission meeting, Aaron McCraney, the former captain, LAPD, he said, because the police commissioners asked him, are you guys lowering the standards? And this is where you come in, JJ. They asked him, are you lowering the standards? He had the gall to say, no, standards are more rigorous today than any time prior. What do you guys say about that?
Well, that's total BS, because my 20-year stint there, they changed the standards twice. And when I say change, they didn't make them more rigorous. They lowered them. And certain ones I agreed with. For instance, I mean, and I came on under LAPD, worked under them for 2.5 years nearly, and before we went to personnel. And you're right, it was very rigorous back then. It was very cut and dry. There was no gray area. Where the gray area came in was the whole person, which I kind of like the whole person, because a 16-year-old making a bad decision is not the same person at 23 or 24 years old. They could have changed their life completely around. They're no longer a juvenile, well, we hope, and they grew up. So judging somebody on their actions at 16, are they the same person? No. Do they deserve a chance? Possibly, depending on what that situation may be. And that's where the whole person concept was developed. And that was developed around 2006. Or went into really full effect then. It was in development when personnel took over. They also had a change with the DQs. And because before it was like, you're disqualified, you're gone, see ya. So they softened it, where they had what they call fix-it DQs, where they had soft DQs, which could be 1 year to 5 years. Then they had perm DQs, which you're gone forever, were supposedly. Well, and we chuckle because we know what that means is they tend to revisit. And this is the problems I have, is LAPD will never get the top tier diversity candidates anyways, because they don't pay enough. The smart ones are going to go where the money is. When you're 22, 24 years old, somebody offers you 100,000 or somebody offers you 67,000, where are you going to go? It's easy. We don't look at retirements or future. We look at, what are you putting in our pocket now? What can you do for me now? Back when I came on, yeah, LAPD had a lot going for it. Pay wasn't one of them. Where I patrolled, we got paid a lot more. But you had a lot of areas you can work. As an officer, you can do detective work as a police officer, which most agencies you can't. So they always had that going for them as a recruiting tool. But when it came to the standards, when you start changing, and what I was discussing is they did lower the standards. They changed it on different types of drugs. They changed it on the finances. But when you become subjective with it, depending on the candidate, like Moses was talking about earlier, because of who they are or what they are. And I sent Ken the email or message yesterday when we were directed as a unit was ironically, 4/20/20. April 20th of 2020 is when the direction of diversity first came up in our staff meeting. I have it in my notes. I dug up my notes from the last 2 years that I worked there. My famous notebooks that has little stars next to them. So that was the first time diversity was brought up. By August, they wanted a full-blown tracking of all diverse candidates and started having meetings about it, strictly about diversity. But what made it worse, they brought in recruiters into these meetings, and you were talking about, and they're openly discussing about if they're going to be DQ'd or not, which you can't do. They're not part of the background unit. That background unit is, everything in the background is confidential. Right. Nobody but the investigating unit are allowed to see it. So they were violating the law. So you can't sit there and tell me that they don't hire by race or gender. How did they get a class? It was all over the news, press releases galore of all females and diverse candidates. It's physically impossible not to have a male Hispanic in those classes because 46 to 48% of the applicant pool are male Hispanics. Now, last time I looked, male Hispanics were still a minority. They were being overlooked. Male Hispanics and male whites were being overlooked. They sat on the shelves for 2 years, unless they knew somebody. If they knew somebody, then they could be hand selected.
Are they still using the score that you get in your oral interview as part of that?
No, and I remember back when we worked under LAPD, certain diverse groups could score 70 and get in, where others had to score 95 to get in.
Or 100.
So, yeah, and it was that way when I started. So and then it went to a different score. So, when you start looking, and we developed a system where only the top tier candidates would float to the top, meaning they passed all their tests. They had no issues in their backgrounds. They were considered tier ones. Those were priority candidates. Didn't matter what you were priority and you worked it. And we averaged in every academy class nearly the percentage of those population breakdowns. If you look, you had anywhere from any given time 9 to 11% African Americans applying with LAPD.
Right.
You had Hispanics are generally together with males and females in the 50s, almost 60% range. So your classes were made up that way. Your Caucasians were generally in the 30 percentile, the 40 percentile. So you're going to have those in your classes as well.
Right.
So they always were that way.
Well, back then in the 90s, the classes when we were hired recruits, they would rank, they would be somewhere in the 100 to 120 recruits. We're not going to see that anytime ever.
One, they can't because the classrooms aren't big enough in the new academy. The old academy, they could abide by. The way that the academy is situated now, it's even hard to get above 50 in those classrooms. I know they say 60, but it's very difficult because of those classrooms are so compact. And they actually, when it gets up above 50, sometimes they split them because it doesn't allow it like the old academy did.
Right.
But you won't even see that. Now, we had a cert list, the famous cert list, where everybody that's eligible to be hired gets certified for hire. It's called the cert list. We had, when they stopped hiring in the most recent, with the riotings and whatever, and the budgets, they stopped hiring. They only did 6 classes in a year instead of their normal 12 to 13. They did hire. They didn't completely stop. It was just we didn't have monthly academy classes. But why in those 2 years not one male Hispanic or male Caucasian was hired unless they knew somebody? That's the issue I had, because on the bottom of every letterhead, every employment type sheet said equal opportunity employment. It's the federal law, it's the state law, it's the city policy. So you violated all 3 of them. When you talk about you could only non-select 3 times was the magic number, then you had to hire. And that's how Rafael Perez got hired. He was non-selected 3 times, then the city put him back on the cert list, they had to hire him. That was the policy. That's how Matt got hired as well. So that's how those old guys got hired. More had he been part of the background or even asked about it. And this is where his ignorance shows. Not once has he come down and asked us about it. Never. No. Never. Had he he could call me right now and I would tell him. And that was the difference. I wasn't afraid even back then. People say, why are you speaking up now? I've been speaking up for the past 5 years as a supervisor. I've always spoke up. I've been speaking up since I was a background investigator. I had run-ins with the manager back then that ran the unit. What is wrong. And I've always believed in that. And I'm always the type that will be outspoken. And Ken, that working with me, I'm very direct. I don't beat around the bush. I probably hurt a lot of feelings when I do get into these meetings. And I know I probably stepped on a few toes. I don't care. I'm not there to make friends. I'm there to do a job. And my job was to see who the best candidates were.
So if a candidate gets disqualified, which we all know, then they have this appeal process, right?
Correct.
Do they still have that civil service where they write an appeal? And
they have, it's not civil service, but they have the right to appeal. We're probably the only agency left in the country that has a disqualification process instead of a straight non-select. A non-select, you're gone, no reason given, no need, but you can reapply the following year. A disqualification, you have to allow them the right to appeal. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And it depends. I've seen them go all the way up to the assistant general manager where he has the final say-so, or she has the final say-so, depending. My time there, we had different ones. So usually it's our chief of our department that has the final say-so to render the appeal good or bad, to allow them back in. But I've seen it go all the way up where candidates actually wrote the mayor, wrote the chief of police, wrote the state governor, like you said, Moses, but it's not up to any of them. It's up to our own public safety people. So they still have that. Where else I have a problem with McCraney was when you revisit those perm DQs and try to resurrect them, or the soft denies trying to resurrect them before their time slots are up. That's where I have an issue. And you're only doing it for a select group. You're not doing it for everybody. If you did it for everybody, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care. I wouldn't fight it. Wouldn't fight it. It's a waste of time. And that's the other thing they don't realize. The system that we had in place was about working the better candidates. And the tier 2s were the ones that haven't passed all the test parts, but pretty good. Tier 3s where they don't have a smoking chance because they have issues. And why should we work them? If they don't have a chance, why are we going to waste our energy and time on somebody that can't get past the standards and guidelines, that don't have the integrity, that's questionable? You want to work the tier 1s. I don't care who they are. When you deviate from that, when we put this process in place, we had to get about 70% of our working effort had to be towards the tier 1s to be successful, to get a class of at least 40 to 44. When we were running the most efficient, we were running at 88% efficiency, meaning 88% of our energy was towards those okay cases. That's why we were filling classes for 4.5 years straight. We filled classes. So when you start working these questionable candidates just based on their race or gender, but they don't meet the standards and guidelines, guess what? Your quality goes down. You're wasting time on somebody that shouldn't be hired, and you're going to fight through that whole process, which delays everything, because it may come back to that investigator, again, 2 or 3 times to redo or further checks. So you're wasting a lot of energy and time. That's one reason why you have low academy classes, because right now, when I left there, it was down to 53%, meaning 53% of our time was spent only on good candidates. That means 47% were spent on bad candidates. So right there alone, you're not going to get 40 per class because the magic number was 70. Now the unit is smaller than it was, and you have less experience.
Yeah. And let me interject. Let me interject here for a second, because I've done interviews with JJ before, and it's like herding cats. And so I have to kind of bring JJ back down to earth. And
I am passionate. I am a passionate person, but because I believe in this. I was a cop. Gina asked me, "You don't work for them. You have nothing to gain. Why would you do this?" Because it's right. I still have family and friends that live back there, and I was a cop. I know what it takes to ride in that black and white. I know what it's like to sit in that thing. Yeah. And, it's still a big part of me. When you earn that right, like you said, Moses, back in our day, 1% of the people that applied made it. 1%. Think about that. Only 1%.
Well, let let me interject. I'm going to give JJ a chance to take a breath because JJ has not taken a breath for about 15 minutes. So I'm going to let you breathe in for a moment. But what I want to mention, Moses brought up something very good, and I want to go into this a little bit. Is that McRaney was talking in the police commission meeting about post standards? That there are 6 standards from post that are the minimum standards to get hired. LAPD uses what's called standards and guidelines. Guidelines are kind of like a blob. You don't, if there are guidelines, it's like, today I feel like you're a DQ. I feel like you're a DQ. I don't feel like you're a DQ. Those are guidelines. They're just like suggestions for hiring. And so going back to what Moses was saying, and this is the elephant in the room, is that you said you had candidates that were white, Moses, that had to go back and get a higher oral interview score, because back in the day, oral interview scores were from 0 to 100. And you could be a diversity, what they call diversity candidates now, back then, and you could get a 70. But if you were white, you had to get 99. Seriously, I'm not kidding. 99. Yeah. You could get 98. Most people go 98. Boom. But no, if you're white, you had to get a higher score. And what the elephant in the room is, and it's always been with LAPD, but more so now, when they talk about lowering standards, and Moses, you keep up with this stuff in the news and everything with hiring. The big question, and I've gotten this over the years, Investigator Roybal, what's going on with my background? Well, yeah, so I'm still working on it. But what I should have said was, you're white. You're white. And the whole thing is this, you're being discriminated against. I could not say that. But the biggest well-known kept secret is that if you are white or Hispanic, you get pushed. And so that's something that I want to bring up, JJ, is that what's the deal with that? And it's blatant. It's all over. They don't hire. And so when LAPD says we don't hire based on race, baloney. I was going to cuss there for a second, but no.
How did they get that class? What we figured out was December
2020, 2021.
Yeah.
2020 or
so
something.
How did you get a class of nothing but diverse candidates then? No male Hispanics or male whites, unless you knew somebody. But it was, I think, 3 of those. So you can't tell me, when majority of your candidate pool were male Hispanics, that you can't have enough to fill a class. They did this purposely. And it was so blatant that because I wouldn't just order my people to break the law by working nothing but diverse, that they changed the testing process. They front loaded the entire testing process with diverse candidates. So that's all that came to us. That's how blatant it became. They actually changed the whole testing and only front loaded it with diverse first, because I wouldn't allow that to happen in the background unit. So that's the only thing that came to us as a flood. Well, if that happens, like I told Captain McRaney, I was like, basically you're going to blow your wad on 2 classes. And then what are you going to do for the rest? You're not going to have any diverse. So how's that going to look to the public if you have no diversity in 4 classes in a row because you blew your wad in 1 or 2?
Right. When I was there in backgrounds, 95, 98, that's when they actually lowered the standards when it came to the physical agility tests. Before, you used to have to climb over the 6-foot wall, run, whatever it was, a mile in less than a mile and a half in less than 9 minutes or whatever it was, 12 minutes, whatever. And then they said, no, now you got to do is just do a little balance test.
Yeah, the PF.
Ride the bicycle, the stationary.
Slide back and forth.
Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
In a room.
Yeah.
And so, and that's part of the lowering that they're overlooking, that they have lowered the standards to get into LAPD throughout the years. And Ken and I spoke to this the other day. When I got there under LAPD, we were still probably in the top 5, if not the top 3 of the hardest backgrounds to pass. By the time I left there, we were probably right above California Department of Corrections. So Riverside Sheriff's was always the laughing, joking one that would make fun of. We were hiring their DQs, their non-selects. We were hiring as LAPD.
So I do want to answer Chief Moore when he answered on this special report by Gina, when he said, "When was the last time you ran a mile and a half?"
Well, you know what,
Chief, when was the last time you actually went side by side?
Yeah. First of all, the mile and a half wasn't about running a distance. The mile and a half was about how much endurance you actually have.
Thank you. Right.
Yes, and that's what he doesn't realize is the mile and a half isn't about how fast you can go after somebody or chase somebody. It's about how long you're going to last for a fight, and you will be fighting in the streets.
Right. And even then, you had resources in place that would help you prepare for the academy.
Yes.
Everybody could go those Tuesdays and Thursday nights and march and do the physical stuff, run to get you ready for the academy. So
and they still had that. They still had the CAP program, which helped. The problem we had as a background unit, and the 2 managers, myself, we were always arguing with LAPD on this, is with the PFQ score, which was a test to get into it wasn't a post-required test to get in academy. It's a test they do in academy at the beginning and one at the end, and you have to pass either one of them. And we knew by the academy staff, if they didn't score 50 at the CAP program, that they would struggle. At 50%, because post-passing was 70 at the time, they could make up the difference of the 20 during the training of the academy. But when they started focusing on diversity, we had somebody scored an 8. That means they did maybe 1 push-up and 2 sit-ups. They couldn't even run. To score an 8, you actually have to be a couch potato slug. And we were getting yelled at by the academy. Why are you sending these people that can't even get out of the chair without falling over? So then the argument, well, what score? And was it 20? Well, let's make it 30 because we're not getting enough in. Or, now the academy's still complaining. So when I left there, it was 30. That was the baseline score. When they hit 30, then they were eligible to hit the floor to start the investigation. But as an investigator, you're looking at 30. Oh man, you're going to put them in the back.
So I do want to talk about the PFQ, but first I want to go back to what I was talking about before. Is that JJ? I want to know why male Hispanics and male whites were discriminated against, and why background investigators had to stop working white and Hispanic candidates if they got a diversity file on their desk.
The city's reasoning was because there was going to be a mass exiting of the diverse candidates from the early hires from when you worked back in the 90s. They were all becoming eligible for retirement. And that was their reasoning for this. And our response was, well, if top tier candidates will always float to the top, you're always going to have that. But they took it a step further when the whole situation happened up in Minneapolis. Even before that, the rumbling started. And they wanted focus. They wanted, you're DQing African Americans at a higher rate. So every study in my 20 years that's ever been done, every time there's a new lieutenant recruitment or the hiring unit, we have this go around. And every study that's done has proven that they weren't. The highest Latinos, they were the highest percentage-wise. African Americans were 4. Caucasians were 3. So as a group, they fell way below percentage-wise. So we weren't DQing them. In fact, we would let certain groups slide more so than others. And you saw that with the review section. So if we DQ somebody, it goes to review section, a civilian board, and they agree with us most of the time. Then it goes to the hiring unit for them to review, and they disagree. Review comes back and says, okay, we disagree now. How does that happen? And that was happen very frequently. And they would look at, well, it's a diverse candidate. Well, they weren't going to tell us that. They're not going to memo us that. They're not going to put it on paper as that. But we all knew, because that's all we saw coming back. That's it. That's all we saw. That's all they wanted. I don't know how many times I sat in my office arguing, or in Zoom meetings arguing, or upstairs arguing over this issue over and over again, because they were coming directly, going up to the investigators and challenging them. Recruiters, don't bother the investigators, come to me. Then with the officers, when LAPD sworn started coming back and doing backgrounds, they were told, and they weren't lying in that interview, they were told to leave out adverse, not to investigate adverse. They were told, why are you writing this in there? Why do you want to make the candidate look bad? That means psych's going to look at it even more. Well, that's our job. So it got so bad that their supervisors would go along with it. I told them, you let me know who that candidate is, I'll flag them and I'll DQ them. If it's a valid DQ, I'll DQ them. And that's what I did. I would DQ them myself. I would pull those cases. They would let me know. I would take the time to read it. And if it was against the standards and guidelines, they were gone. They were gone. So there was a lot of direction given towards certain groups. And like I said, the proof was all over the news. You had an all diverse academy class. It's impossible to get when the majority of your applicants are male Hispanics. That is the number one pull. So how do you not have more male Hispanics in that class than anybody when you had none? That's impossible. That's impossible.
So when Moore in that interview said that LAPD does not hire based on race and gender, what is your response to that?
Like I said, either he's ignorant to it and hasn't been told of how backgrounds are being ran or what was being directed down there, or he's a flat out lying. Those are the only two reasons that I can give. Because we know, like I said, directions were given. Started on April 20th of 2020. We were given specific direction on that. And the tracking of the diverse candidates started in August of that same year.
Yeah, but
that's
just
when we started tracking them.
I mean, just go back to the days where we were there in the 90s.
Yeah.
We mentioned it. Every month, show up for certification. And if you didn't show up, you're not going to be considered for the next academy class. But we separate them by groups, and it just looked awful to me. I just remember saying, "Okay, all the Hispanics over here, please, and all the blacks over here, please."
Think of this. When I started there, we still had a consent decree that we had to follow. Why was that put in place? Because of selective hiring. Now you're doing selective hiring, but just the opposite. Just the opposite. So, like I said, I don't care. I'm a minority myself.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't realize. I'm a minority too. But
I remember telling my applicants that were Caucasian males, I said, dude, go back and retake your oral, man. Try to bump it up, because
you had to.
I'm not going to be able to touch you unless you get it up there. And they couldn't understand.
I had two candidates at the exact same time. One was a female going to college. The other one was a male teacher at a high school with a master's degree. She had a 70. He had a 97 oral. He was white. And she got hired and she quit during the academy, but he had to go back and get like a 99 in his oral. And he was outstanding. She met the minimum standards to get hired. And I want to mention something, Moses, that recently, in the last few months, I was contacted by two LAPD officers that recently retired after 25 years that I did their backgrounds. And so you have people that you did backgrounds on that they've retired now. Yeah. So I want to...
Did you see this question?
Yes, I want to go ahead and it says, honest question for JJ. In no way would I advocate for lower standards. However, what's the solution when LAPD can't recruit to attrition at the current moment due to false media narrative?
Well, Moses brought this up right at the beginning. Every agency is having problems recruiting. I don't care how much they pay. Santa Monica pays, 105 to start, and they're not at full staff. They're like, I think last I heard, going to be 20 some down. So everybody has a hard time recruiting, but that doesn't justify putting schlep rocks in a car that doesn't know what they're doing. I've always said this from the beginning. I'd rather have one good qualified candidate because he'll do the job of 3 to 5 crappy ones out there. So LAPD's always been grossly understaffed. Even in my day, you guys were always grossly understaffed, but you managed the city well. Why? Because you had a lot of people out there with great integrity that are willing to sacrifice their lives. You remove all that out. And that's the problem I have. When you start removing that out, removing the integrity, you have criminal elements that they wanted to hire that I sat there and fought against hiring. Crack dealers, gang members, known current gang members, documented ones. That's where I had problems. And I would get passionate and heated in these meetings and argue my point. That's why you have the media badgering you guys all the time, because you make these mistakes. Now, there isn't any one answer. Now, everybody wants that one answer. For the African-American community, and I've always said this, the mistrust has been created over generations. Well, it's going to take generations to gain it back. But you have to get deep into those communities to gain it back. Mm-hmm. But majority of them, like I said, the good ones are going to go elsewhere where they're not going to get flack. They're going to get paid, and where they're trusted. That's where they're going to go. So when you spend 90% of your recruitment effort and budget towards 9% of the population and forget about everybody else, well, you're going to lose a lot of good qualified candidates in those other segments, in those other groups. And that's what we started seeing. Those male Hispanics and male whites that had to redo their backgrounds and update them. Well, about 10 to 15% said, no, you know what? I'm gone. I went with somebody else. Mm-hmm. Well, we lost them. Why? Because they wouldn't hire them. Now, there probably is a lot more. We just never heard back and got a reason why they never called us back. We don't know. They may have gotten hired. And some of these people got hired at other types of jobs, not even law enforcement. They got tired of waiting.
Yeah.
So there are good candidates. Will they ever meet attrition again? Not unless people stop quitting. I mean, will they ever get to 10,000? It would take a long, long time because people don't want a job right now.
It's going to take 5 to 10 years to get
officers
back.
Yeah.
There was this whole thing with diversity hiring. There was an article a few months ago, they were saying that black officers have been retiring in droves from LAPD, and they've gone down from 13% manpower of black officers on LAPD to 9% today. Mm-hmm. And so they're losing their diversity officers, and they can't get enough diversity candidates in the pipeline. And so they're not going to meet attrition every year.
No, they're not. And I told them that. I spoke to I got all the numbers from the LAPD union, and I met with McCraney himself. I met with the new lieutenant that they got. I forget her name. Besides meeting with the prior lieutenant, I met with our people, and I told them it's impossible. First of all, you cut our unit size in half. Then you implemented this idiotic system that took longer to do backgrounds with. It's impossible to meet the numbers. And they're like, oh, we can do it. I said, you can't. The maximum you're going to be able to hire is about 460. You're never going to get close to 700. And the true number is going to be far beyond that. We're figuring about not anywhere from 800 to 900 because of disciplinary measures as well. And people that just got sick and tired and wanted to leave.
And then we take into the equation that they passed that new law that now police officers can be decertified.
Correct.
Right.
Bad conduct, which in some of the cases that I've been following,
it should be.
Yeah, they should be fired because those are.
I don't have a problem with that because I've always said this: if an officer breaks the law, they should always get maximum sentencing. I've always said that because we're trusted to uphold the law.
Right.
So we should always get the maximum sentence.
My
Automatic.
only point with that is it's the attitude behind that law.
Oh yeah. What they're going to go after now, are you going to be subjective and going after somebody that just has a lot of complaints against them because they're actively working out there?
Right.
And then you figured out that, out of the 102 complaints, 101 were from gang members because they worked a crash unit, I mean,
Yeah.
So that's where they don't look beyond what they're doing and they don't care.
Right.
But, they answer this one question by lowering the standards, you're going to see more officers become injured easier. True. When you're not physically fit, yeah, something's going to happen out there. When you, like psych, for instance, didn't want to hire people out of the military coming back for a war zone. If they did 2 or more tours, they were automatically benched. It was like, here's people that know when to fire a gun, have a higher requirement to fire back, knows what to do under heated situations. They have to actually be shot at and have permission to shoot back. So, and you're not letting them out. They didn't want anybody that's been in more
There's
than
a
one
good question
fight.
there, Ken. You want to answer that good question there?
Oh
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that, but first I want to get into this. I'm gonna respond to this question about the PFQ. The reason, they say Moore says, well, you have to run a mile and a half to, blah blah blah, and McCraney talked about that during the police commission meeting. The whole purpose of the PFQ, people, is to get you in the mindset to be in physical conditioning when you get in the academy. Because when you get out, you have to have that mindset. And there's been tons of times where officers will tell you, or the doctors will tell you, that because an officer was in good physical condition, they did not die from that gunshot wound. And when you go on the ground wrestling with somebody and they're trying to take your gun, if you're a fatty eating donuts and you don't have the cardio, if they didn't teach you that in the academy, then you're out of luck. You're going to run out of breath in that fight. And for them to say that the PFQ score isn't important, what they're doing also is when they went down to the 50% to get into the academy. When Moses and I were hired, we had to get 70% on that minimum 70% on the PFQ to get into the academy. When they go down to 58, 10% to get into the academy, the word that I'm hearing, and I talk to people from all over the department, the academy, command staff, in the field, training officers, and all over the department, and they tell me what they're doing is they're shifting the burden to get these recruits ready to the academy staff.
Yeah,
and that's wrong. So that's a stupid. That's stupid of them to say, but I want to move on.
There again, it's the ignorance that Chief Moore and even Aaron's showing, that they don't understand the true meaning behind it. I personally got in a hand-to-hand fight with a duster for 9 minutes and 38 seconds before backup got there.
Yeah.
So if I was a fatty eating donut cop or I would have been dead. But because of the fact that I was still in physical good shape, allowed me to fight for those 9 minutes and 38 seconds and survive.
Right.
Until backup got there.
Moses, is this the question you're asking about?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Go ahead and answer that, Moses.
I think the LAPD is going to reach 8,000 before they're going to go up.
Yeah.
Actually, they're going to go down.
Yeah.
When I came on the job, we were 8,000 steady forever until the mayor, Antonio Villagrosa, whatever his last name is, he pledged 10,000, and that was that big push for that to happen. And I think it was eventually done under Reardon, or I forget who took.
No, it was done under him only because, and Ken was part of the unit that we did, was when they absorbed general services.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how they get that 100.
That's how they got over the 10,000 mark.
So
to answer Mr. Dirt's, go ahead, Moses.
So I think it's going to go back to 8,000 before it go up.
Yeah, and to answer Mr. Dirt as well, to piggyback onto this, I was in a meeting. JJ was in a meeting in 2018 with the chief analyst, the chief of backgrounds, and she said to us at that time, LAPD wants to have manpower of 12,000 officers for the Olympics. This was in 2018. This is before they lost 1,000 officers in the last 3 years. And at that time, we were at 10,000. They messed with the numbers to make it 10,000. But I'm thinking to myself, 12,000 officers, really? No, I mean, if there's
there's no way. First of all, the budget couldn't handle the sudden influx because and I told him this, first of all, you're not going to need that many officers because they'll do exactly what they did during the 84 Olympics, busted out overtime, brought in a lot of other agencies throughout the state to work and pay because the Olympics are paying for it. The money came out of the Olympic coffer, didn't come out of the city's coffer. I think the city during the 84, if I'm not mistaken, only hired 100 and some extra officers that they retained after the Olympics. That was it, because that's all their budget can handle. So to sit there and say, yeah, we're going to add 2,000. No, there's no way the budget, they could even afford it. They're bitching about paying 10,000 cops.
Yeah, so that was crap in 2018, and it's crap. It's more crap now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big.
And I agree with Moses. I mean, I think the number's going to. Hopefully, it doesn't go down to 8,000, but I predicted they'd be at 9,000 was the true number, and they're there now. They're at slightly over 9,000, and that's the exact number that I told them they would be at. Before
I'm with Moses. They're going to go down to 8,000.
Wow, that would hurt them. That would hurt them a lot.
Well, when we talk about 8,000, Moses, you know this. When we talk about 8,000 officers, that's not patrol.
No,
that includes IOD people, people at desks,
detectives working.
Detectives. Yeah.
So there's about 2,000 or so detectives, give or take. So like right now, so if we have 7,000 sworn potentially. That could be out of patrol, but it's not going to happen.
You don't. What is it? At any given time on one night in LA, didn't it come out to like 600 and some officers?
Oh, in the field at one given time?
At one given time. That was it. That was the problem. And this is where they're so grossly understaffed. They've always been.
But you know what? During the riots, the 1992 riots, when we did the A and B shift, 12 on, 12 off, and everybody was working. Man, aside from the riots, the crime was down big time because there was 4 deep at every corner. There was at least 2 or 3 cars at every traffic stop. I mean, people. I mean, we were out there deep, but that costs a lot of money. Yes. So I mean, so it's doable to put all the resources out there, but that costs a lot of money.
Well, yeah, because you had detectives in uniform out there. You had everybody was ordered off vacation and nobody was on days off. Right. So, they need to not worry about the Olympics because the Olympic money, you can bring in cops from other agencies and just pay out of the Olympic coffer. They need to worry about what's happening internally with that department. They are and it always goes from the leadership as setting an example, and it's a poor example. And we had plenty of people, recruits, telling us, I want to withdraw. I don't want to pursue because the chief doesn't back us up, the city council doesn't back us up, the mayor doesn't back us up. So I don't want to go to a city and work where nobody backs us up, and I got to worry about what's going on inside more than I have to worry about what's happening in the streets.
Yeah,
and they have to clean that up first. And
I want to move on.
Will that help with recruitment? Sure.
I want to move on to another stupid comment made by a police commissioner. This one was ultimately dumb. Moses, I don't know if you watched the police commission meeting following that news story, but I watched the comments by McRaney and Moore and the police commissioners. And this one police commissioner made the most stupid comment ever. He said that what was he talking about? Oh, he said comparing the past LAPD backgrounds that Moses and I did in the 90s. To today's backgrounds. He says, in the past, we hired the likes of Rafael Perez. Do we want to go back to those days? And I'm going, you are a sincere dumbass, because if you go post Rafael Perez, up until 2023, I can pull up story after story in the 2020s of officers getting arrested. Do you want to go back to 2023 and prior? Do you want to do those kind of, what a dumb comment to make, to compare, like, today's backgrounds are so awesome.
Well, and we talked about that. He was DQ'd. So they didn't want to hire him.
Also, Dorner.
Dorner was DQ'd by Davy Combs, one of our
That's right.
investigators, and we were overturned. So, and it was hard. And I know, being a former investigator, I know how hard it was for the current investigators that worked under me. When your case gets overturned, you take it personal. I told them, don't take it personal. You did your job. As long as we continue to do our job as investigators and properly DQ somebody that should be DQ'd, and nothing could happen to us. And that's why nothing ever happened to the background unit itself, is because they always did the right thing. They literally had 32 months arrest last night. That's because of the stress level out there now.
Jeez. Yeah. They literally had 30 DUI arrests last year. Do you want to go back to those backgrounds, Moses? Do you want to go back?
And that's behavior. I would love to see that audit, because I think you would see the red flags that were ignored, and that's lowering the standards. And so,
because they don't. The biggest argument that I had with the administration was just that they wanted paper movers, just shufflers. They didn't want investigators, and they're trying to eliminate those that like to investigate. Mm-hmm. And they brought in a group of people that are college educated, has zero law enforcement experience, and now they're doing backgrounds. They have no experience on interviewing and interrogation techniques. They don't know the signs. They don't have the gut intuitions that developed of years of experience of dealing with people. How are they going to catch these people in the backgrounds? So even though that on the surface it appears that it's okay, is it? Did they really dig? Did they ask the right questions? Sure, you have the standard questions that are on these check forms, but do they ever go beyond that? Do they ever ask further questions? I always ask at employment, was there anybody here they didn't like the candidate or he didn't get along with? Because that's who I want to talk to. I want to know why they didn't get along with them. And that's not on the form.
Yeah.
So and they don't bring up the things like going back to those years, Rafael Perez and all that, and apparently, Moses, you and I did backgrounds that allowed these crap officers to get on the job. I don't know what we were thinking at the time, but we should be.
You're never going to catch everybody. You're never going to be 100%, but there's a lot of safeguards that are in place that were removed. Questions from the old PIQs that were removed. So when you start removing these questions because you want more people, when you start lowering the physical fitness, getting rid of the written exam, a true written exam, you're lowering the quality of the candidate, period. So you want more in, but just because you allow more in doesn't mean you're going to get more hired. So you wrote down here, McCraney responded to the current class chosen from 87 completed backgrounds, which is really low, completed backgrounds, but only 32 were hired. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, he was talking about more rigorous backgrounds. No, that means you're wasting time on candidates that you shouldn't be working.
Right.
You should be working the better candidates that are more qualified. So if you're telling me that all of these were the better candidates, then there's something wrong with your testing to allow them in.
The ones that should have been knocked out of the process at the stages that are allowed to get into a background investigator. That's the reason you had the high number and you have the low number of hires, not because we're DQing so many people because they're bad.
Just based off his numbers here shows you. So if you're not working, nothing but bad candidates, and they're all bad, and that's why they're being DQ'd. How are they getting into backgrounds to begin with? Where's the filters? Where's the filter?
And that could also be a budget situation where they're looking at the budget and they're not going to hire X amount of number. So yeah, he's just trying to skew the numbers. Yeah,
first of all, when they went, do you remember the big blue forms that you had to fill out with the 183 questions when we started the PIQ?
Your PIQ.
I'm not going to mention her name, but the deputy chief sat in a meeting when we were talking about changing the standards and lowering them. Okay, we actually had meetings about lowering standards when the new standards that were lowered came out. She's like, well, why don't we use the PHF from post? Well, because our PIQ is more thorough. Well, if that's post basic, why do we need to be more than that? That was her statement.
Yeah, I know that. I know who that deputy chief is.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, why do you want more than that? Every agency out there, except for one, because they only hire like one every 10, 15 years, uses a additional questionnaire form. Every agency that we survey. And she got rid of it because why do we want more?
Why in LAPD, why have they continually removed items from the background process unless they wanted to go, yeah, you know what? This particular thing is DQing people. We need to get rid of that. And we need to get rid of that and all that type of thing. So when they got rid of the PIQ, there was 200 questions that they didn't have to answer. And so Moses and I did the PIQs with the candidates. We're gonna heading towards winding this down, but I do want to bring up one thing.
Wait, I got 204 more questions to go.
We'll have to do a part 4 and 5. One of the police commissioners, one of the police commissioners, a guy named Errol Southers, he's a professor, and he apparently came from Santa Monica PD. He retired from there. I don't know what rank he was, and he teaches at USC, but he was also a TAC officer at Rio Hondo Academy. He made a very good point, and this is a tricky point because LAPD kind of had to shuffle on this one. Is he said that what are the stats once a recruit gets out of the academy and they're in FTO? What are the stats of them failing FTO? And that would be an indicator that we're hiring crap officers. They get into FTO and then they're bounced out of FTO. That's baloney, because I speak to supervisors on LAPD, field supervisors, and they tell me it's almost impossible to fire a diversity hire from the field. Almost impossible. It's not even worth it. So those stats
during the probation period.
Yes. Once they get out of the academy, they're working patrol. Those stats would not even. Everybody passes FTO, unless you're like some of the guys, they get arrested. So that stat wouldn't even fly. But so in wrapping this up, I got 2 questions. One for Moses, one for JJ. Moses, what do you think about Chief Moore and McCraney saying that LAPD backgrounds are more rigorous than they were back in the day because now they have poly, which is crap, and they have the internet? So I'll answer the poly. We've always had poly. In the 90s, the background investigators would decide if someone gets a poly.
Well,
Go ahead.
Yeah, if there was adverse information, then the polygraph would be used to resolve that adverse information. Right. Well, number one, I think that ever since they went to the civilian board, not to say JJ is not good, but I think I had some applicants that I was kind of mentoring, and when they would explain to me their background process by the civilian investigators, I had some concern because I know these people, and they weren't even getting phone calls returned or issues with their insurance company, documents, whatever. It looked like it wasn't done with a sense of pride, and it's maybe because they weren't sworn police officers and they weren't part of the LAPD sworn, family. And now it's a secondary post-retirement, gig, and they just want to get paid. So maybe that.
Mm-hmm.
So I always thought that bringing back sworn police officers, I think you'll get more thorough, more better investigations. And that's actually how I became a good interrogator, by watching these polygraphs, and a good interviewer by talking to these people. And some of my investigations actually led to some arrests. I don't know if they are afraid to arrest people nowadays, but back then we had Sergeant Mark Zimbla. He was a hard charger.
Yeah.
He helped. He allowed us to arrest people, because at the end of the day, we're still cops, and if they commit a crime within our city, guess what? They're going to go to jail. And a lot of that was like child molestation stuff. So it was heavy duty stuff. It wasn't something minor.
And I'm getting texts as we speak that McCraney and Moore want to get rid of the poly altogether.
Well,
and,
they did. They tried that before.
Let's see what happens on that. But I will mention something. So with regard to him saying we have the poly now, LAPD has always had the option of the poly. In the past, it was the background investigators who said this something smells wrong here. I'm gonna ask that this candidate be given a poly. The other thing about now they have the internet, everything, the absolute 90% of the background is the same. You did driving records. You did criminal histories, fingerprints. You went and did everything in person, employment checks, residence checks. Everything is virtually the same that you check. The only difference with the internet is there is some stuff that comes up on social media, but you don't get any of the dirt. There was very rare times, and JJ, you can speak to this too, but there's very rare times that I actually picked something off the internet and someone got DQ'd because of it. So having the internet, we would go through everything we could possibly go through and get that information. But we do want to wrap this up. But JJ, here's the question for you: is LAPD lying about the hiring standards?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because of what we just proved. They just in my tenure there, they changed the standards twice, officially and unofficially 2 additional times. They manipulated the testing process. And when I say standards, I'm also talking about testing standards, not just the background standards, but they manipulated the testing to allow unqualified candidates to come through the process. Candidates that can't read and write, can't comprehend, can't even run or do one push-up. So they lowered that as well. Had they lowered the background standards? Absolutely. Some of them are justified. I agree with the modern age, with everything that has occurred through the years. We had to make adjustments to them, but some of them are ridiculous. What I am talking about, and what those other people were talking about in an interview, is that you are withholding certain standards for certain groups of people just because I want them in, because that's our agenda. That's just an agenda. That's what we desire. That's not the law. The law states it's equal opportunity. And that's why I spoke up when they called me and asked if I was willing to. I said, absolutely. I've been fighting that when I was there. It just didn't occur. It had been occurring. It's been occurring forever. So the big question that she asked me is, do I expect anything to happen from this? I said, no. They'll deny it. They'll push it away. They'll hope it goes away. But at least it's on record. Nobody could ever say down the road, in the future, well, you never were told. You can't play ignorance now. You can't be ignorant to it and say, I didn't know. Nobody told me this occurred.
Well, the only change that is going to occur from this is that we're going to see somebody get into some big trouble, and because we lowered the standards. And I just pray and hope that somebody asks for an audit of that person or that police officer's background, and let's learn from that. Because until we learn from those mistakes and own up to them, we're going to continue to make them. But I think if they were right. This person should have been disqualified for these reasons, but we didn't because we lowered the standards. Let's not do that again. I think that's
Have you ever, in your career, ever heard the city say they were wrong?
No.
No, they just pay out.
Yeah, exactly.
So a question for both of you guys. Is Chief Moore lying when he says they don't hire based on race?
Like I said, it's either ignorance that he's not being told, and nor has he took it upon himself to ask, or he is lying. Those are the only two answers that I have. I can't say positively he's lying because he may not know.
And what do you think, Moses?
Well, I think when you consider the process in itself, it's geared toward hiring certain diversity groups. So the answer is yes, you are hiring based on race. So there you have it.
So
the two classes showed that, yeah, they are targeted for that.
So Commissioner Soberoff, who's been there about, I don't know how many years, he made a comment. He said, standards goes up means qualified candidates go down, right? And I mean, standards go up means qualified candidates go down. So, so the higher you have the standards, the less chance of having bad candidates come through the pipeline.
And part of what he's saying is correct, and that's why we made certain adjustments. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I've never gotten a fisticuff fight, dragged out knuckle fight with somebody high on marijuana. You give them a bag of chips and handcuffs, and when you're done, handcuff yourself and walk you to jail. They'll do it. Most of them are passive. Drunk, on the other hand, you're fighting them all the time. So the weed thing, we made adjustments. I agreed with a lot of them, but the behavior behind it, why do you still want to use it? Oh, I can't handle the stress. Then don't do the job. I mean, it's as simple as that. So certain things you have to look at as behavior, and this is where the whole person can be beneficial. So, but changing the standards to keep with current times, sometimes you do have to make adjustments to them. But when you overlook them or ignore them to hire people, there's your problem.
Yep. Well, thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate it. Thanks,
nice everybody. Meeting you, Moses.
Thanks everybody who stayed the whole course, an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. And we really appreciate you and all your comments and questions. If you listen to this after we sign off, it's going to be on YouTube. You can still add questions and comments, and we'll get back in here and we'll answer them in the comments section. But Moses and JJ, have a good weekend. Hang in there after we sign off, and we'll chat for a second. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Police Applicant Podcast. We are the premier police background prep site in the U.S. and Canada. For more information on scheduling your police background consultation, go to policebackground.net. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes.